Just a few hours before my brother's wedding, I got a message that stopped me cold. Don't go to your brother's wedding. Check your husband's garage. At first, I thought it was some kind of twisted joke. But the moment I lifted the garage door, I stood there, frozen, speechless. I had been standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the lace collar on my dress, brushing away imaginary wrinkles from the skirt. Today was a big day. My younger brother Brian was getting married. Our whole family had been buzzing with excitement for weeks. Brian was the golden child, the guy who lit up every room, and we were all happy he'd found someone like Rachel. As his older sister, I felt this deep emotional pull toward the day, like I'd been part of the journey. I'd seen how his eyes lit up whenever he talked about her, the way he seemed lighter when she was around. Sunlight poured through the windows of our apartment in Lakewood, filling the place with a warm, nervous energy. My mom was clattering around in the kitchen making her signature homemade pies, her way of managing stress. Dad was seated at the dining table with a pen in hand, double-checking the guest list. I was just about finished getting ready. My husband Jason had already left earlier that morning, saying he had a quick meeting with a client. "Don't worry, babe. I'll be back in time for the ceremony," he told me with a soft kiss goodbye. His tone was easy, affectionate, just like always, but something about it didn't sit right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but that nagging discomfort stayed with me. I glanced at myself in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me was calm, put together. I worked as an accountant for a big firm downtown, took pride in my routines, in how grounded I felt. Jason and I had been married 10 years. Sure, we had the occasional argument. What couple doesn't? But overall it felt steady, solid. Or at least I thought it did. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I frowned, assuming it was spam. But when I looked at the message, my heart jumped. Don't go to the wedding. Check your husband's garage. I stared at it for a few seconds, unsure if I should laugh or be scared. Who would send something like that? Was it a prank? A wrong number? I tried brushing it off, but that cold knot in my stomach kept tightening. The energy in the apartment shifted. What had been warm and lively now felt strange, like something invisible was standing in the room with me. I read the message again. Check your husband's garage. What the hell was in there? Jason wasn't a secretive guy. At least he never had been. Or maybe I just never noticed. I tried calling him, but it rang and rang. No answer. He's probably still in that meeting, I whispered, but my voice didn't convince me. My hands felt cold. My chest was tight. I tried to shake it off by helping Mom in the kitchen, kneading dough and chatting about the wedding cake. But my brain kept circling back to those words. Don't go to the wedding. Check the garage. They lodged in my head like tiny barbs. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore. The urge to look was too strong. What if I didn't check and something was really wrong? Jason might be angry, sure, he might say I didn't trust him. But could I really ignore this gut-deep panic? The ceremony was still hours away. Jason should have called by now. But he hadn't. And that's when I remembered something he once mentioned. He had made a spare key for the garage just in case. I tried to remember where Jason had said he kept the spare key, digging through my memory until it finally clicked. He once mentioned hiding it inside the old keepsake box we kept in the closet, the one packed with faded letters and souvenirs from vacations we barely remembered. My fingers shook as I opened it, and there it was. A small, dull key that looked so ordinary, yet suddenly felt like it could split my world in two. I hesitated, staring at it, questioning whether I was really about to let a stranger's message undo a decade of trust. But the fear pressing on my chest, the sharp edge of curiosity, and the quiet ache growing behind my ribs were stronger than any logic I could muster. I told myself I'd be quick, discreet, that no one needed to know I'd even gone, and afterward I could come back, say nothing, and act like everything was still intact. Slipping out of the apartment without a sound, I moved carefully past my parents, who remained completely unaware, and stepped into the bright, cloudless morning that somehow felt colder than it should have. The garage wasn't far, just a short walk from our building, and I moved quickly, trying to quiet the thoughts that spun faster with each step, repeating the message over and over in my mind until it rang like an alarm. When I arrived, the rows of garages stood in a lifeless line at the edge of the lot, silent and gray, as if waiting for me to open something I'd never be able to close again. I found Jason's unit, pulled the key from my pocket and pushed it into the lock, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it echoed in the empty space around me. The metal door creaked open slowly, and the smell of oil, rubber, and concrete rushed out to meet me, cold and heavy in the stale air. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the space. There was Jason's old Lincoln in the corner, covered in dust, with tools along the wall, spare parts and boxes stacked neatly, nothing at all that looked out of place. I exhaled sharply, realizing I'd been holding my breath, almost laughing at myself for thinking it could be anything real, until I turned to leave and something in the far corner caught my eye. A large cardboard box sat beneath a worn-out blanket, and even before I touched it, I knew it didn't belong there. My feet moved on their own, and with a single pull, I lifted the blanket to reveal what lay beneath. A woman's purse, a pair of high heels, and a sleek perfume box with a familiar logo, all of which made my stomach twist because I recognized them immediately. They belonged to Rachel, my brother Brian's fiancée. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes blurred for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, because there was no reason for her belongings to be here, hidden among Jason's things. With shaking hands, I reached into the box and pulled out the purse, unzipping it slowly as if something inside might scream. Inside were her wallet, a small makeup bag, a set of keys, and, buried at the bottom, a thick stack of photographs. My heart thudded as I held them up to the light, and what I saw made my knees nearly buckle. It was Jason and Rachel, together on a beach, embracing like lovers, kissing, holding hands, laughing in a way that didn't need any explanation. In one photo, he held her hand while she leaned her head against his shoulder. In another, they sat in a sunny cafe, sunglasses on, looking like the cover of a travel magazine. I staggered back, gripping the photos like they burned, the garage spinning around me as the full weight of it sank in, and I knew without any doubt that Jason had been lying to me, and Rachel had never loved Brian. Still stunned, I reached again into the box and pulled out a folder, unsure if I could take more but too far gone to stop. Inside were printed messages, handwritten notes, and scraps of conversations between Jason and Rachel, every line twisting the knife deeper. "Baby, I'm so glad we're doing this together. I know it's wrong, but I can't live without you. I'm marrying Brian for the future. You know this won't last. Once I'm his wife, we'll finally be together. He'll leave Jason. And we'll be free." My hands shook as I dropped the folder onto the hood of the car, barely able to breathe, every word slicing through me with brutal precision, and it hit me. Rachel had never loved my brother, and Jason, who had stood in our home that morning and kissed me goodbye, had been acting all along. My first instinct was rage, pure, hot, blinding rage that made me want to scream, destroy everything in the garage, and call them both to expose the entire affair in one savage moment. But instead, I stood in that dim, dusty silence, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and let that fury settle into something harder, colder, resolve. Because I couldn't let Brian marry someone who had only ever lied to him, and I wasn't going to let these two burn another life the way they had just burned mine. Jessica pulled out her phone and began taking photos of every single item. The heels, the perfume box, the purse, the stack of photographs, and the printed messages, capturing each one with careful precision, methodically and without hesitation. She knew she had to be smart about it, because if Jason ever found out she'd come here, he might try to cover his tracks, destroy the evidence, or spin it into some innocent misunderstanding. Once she was finished, she put everything back exactly the way it had been, matching the positions down to the smallest detail. She wiped off anything she'd touched, not wanting to leave behind a single trace, then turned off her flashlight and stepped quietly out of the garage, locking the door behind her with a trembling hand. The moment she stepped outside, the air felt wrong, thinner, colder, distant from reality, and as she walked back toward the car, her thoughts spiraled uncontrollably. What now? Should she go to the wedding and pretend everything was fine, or tell Brian the truth before it was too late? She knew she couldn't do it in front of everyone, not at the ceremony, not in the middle of celebration, but she also knew silence was no longer an option, not after what she'd seen. Jessica climbed into her car, gripped the steering wheel tightly, and closed her eyes for a moment, forcing herself to breathe before making a decision. She would tell Brian in private, somewhere quiet, where she could speak freely without the weight of an audience pressing down on them. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number. It rang several times before he finally answered, his voice light, cheerful, a little distracted. "Hey Jess. What's going on? Why aren't you here yet?" he asked. Jessica did her best to steady her voice and answered firmly, "Brian, I need to talk to you. It's really important." He hesitated and asked what was wrong, his tone shifting slightly. "I can't explain over the phone," she said, swallowing hard. "It's personal. Can we meet just for a few minutes?" There was a long pause on the line, and she could almost hear the tension in his breathing before he finally replied, "Jess, The wedding's in less than an hour. I know, she said quietly, but it's about Rachel. Another pause followed, then a soft sigh. Okay, he said at last. Where? Back entrance of the venue. In half an hour, she told him. Please, Brian. I'll be there, he said, and then he hung up. Jessica leaned her head against the seat, her pulse still racing, her hands cold and shaky, but she knew she had already done the hardest part. She had made the choice to speak the truth no matter what it cost. She arrived at the venue a few minutes early and spotted Brian near the rear entrance, pacing in tight circles, glancing at his watch with a tense expression that gave away his rising anxiety. His tuxedo looked flawless, his hair freshly styled, but everything about his posture, the way he shifted his weight, the way his eyes kept scanning the lot, made it clear he wasn't at ease. Jessica parked the car, stepped out with the envelope clutched in one hand and walked toward him. As soon as Brian saw her, he came over quickly, his brows furrowed with concern. What's going on, Jess? You're really starting to scare me. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened her purse, pulled out the envelope and placed it gently in his hands. Just look, she said softly. You deserve to know the truth. Brian took it with a frown, opened it and started flipping through the photographs. At first he smiled faintly, nervously as if assuming it might be a mistake, but as he kept turning page after page his face lost color. His brows knit together, his mouth opened slightly, but he said nothing. Then he reached the printed messages and stopped. He stared at them in silence, reading through each one, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. Slowly his hands began to shake. He looked up at Jessica, his eyes wide and filled with tears. Is this real? He asked, barely above a whisper. This can't be real. I wish it wasn't, Jessica said, her voice low and thick. But I found all of it in Jason's garage. I saw it with my own eyes. Brian looked back down at the photos, gripping them so tightly the paper crumpled at the corners, his chest rising and falling in jagged, uneven waves. The truth was hitting him slowly, painfully, undeniably. Why? He whispered almost to himself. Why would she do this to me? Jessica stepped closer, reached out and gently touched his arm. I don't know, she said. But you can't marry her now. Not after this. Not knowing what you know. He turned away slightly, pressed a palm against his forehead and exhaled hard, like he was trying to hold the rest of himself together. The wedding's in an hour, he muttered. Everyone's already here. Mom, Dad, the guests, how the hell am I supposed to do this? You're not alone, Jessica told him gently. Whatever you decide, I'll be right here. We'll get through this together. Brian stared at her for a moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes glassy, and then finally he gave a small nod. The decision had landed. It hurt like hell, but he'd made it. And in that moment, Jessica saw something solid take shape behind his pain. A kind of quiet strength. Let's go, he said. Inside the venue, soft music floated through the air and guests filled the space with happy chatter, sipping champagne, waiting in anticipation. Rachel stood near the floral arch, glowing in her wedding dress, nervously adjusting her veil as Brian walked toward her. She turned, smiling brightly. Danny, sweetheart, where have you? There won't be a wedding, he said calmly, his voice steady and firm. The room went silent. The murmurs died instantly. Rachel blinked, confused. What? What are you talking about? Is this a joke? I know, Brian said. I know everything, about you, about Jason. I've seen the pictures. I've read the messages. Rachel's face twisted, first in confusion, then panic. No, that's not true. That's a lie. Who told you that? She snapped. This is slander. It doesn't matter who told me, Brian replied, his voice steady and low. What matters is I know the truth now, and I'm not going to marry someone who's been lying to me all along. Her voice cracked, sharp and shrill, full of disbelief. How dare you? How dare you ruin this day? Do you even know what you're doing? I know exactly what I'm doing, he said, his tone cool and resolute. I'm stopping this before it turns into something even worse. Rachel turned toward Jessica, her eyes wide, wild with rage. It was you, wasn't it? You've always hated me. You've always been jealous. Don't be ridiculous, Jessica replied calmly, not flinching. I'm not jealous. I'm protecting my brother from someone who's been lying to his face. Protecting? Rachel hissed. You mean sabotaging? You wanted to destroy what we had. You've always wanted to. You were never going to be happy, Jessica said, her voice quiet but unwavering. Not when it was all built on lies. Rachel shook with fury. She stepped toward Jessica, hand raised in a blur of emotion, but before it could land, Brian caught her wrist and held it firmly. Don't, he said. Just don't. Get out of here, Rachel. And don't come back. Her mouth dropped open, stunned. She pulled her arm free, looked around at the frozen guests, the ruined flowers and the shattered dreams beneath her heels. Then with a furious cry she turned and stormed down the aisle, slamming the door behind her without looking back. Brian stood motionless, his jaw tight, his hands clenched, then slowly sank onto a nearby chair. His shoulders dropped as if the strength had drained from his body, his hands clasped together like he was holding onto something fragile. The silence in the room was unbearable. What happens now? He whispered. Jessica crouched beside him, her voice gentle. Now you breathe, she said softly. And then we start over. Not long after the ceremony was called off, Jason approached Jessica with nervous steps, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. His face was pale, his eyes flickering with confusion. Jessica, he said, voice uneasy. What's going on? Why did Brian cancel the wedding? She met his gaze directly, standing straight, no longer afraid, only clear, certain. Because he knows, Jason, she said. He knows about you and Rachel. Jason froze like he'd been punched. His mouth opened slightly but no sound came out. The panic behind his eyes was immediate and unmistakable. What are you talking about? He stammered, barely holding it together. It doesn't matter anymore, she said coldly. What matters is that it's over. He's not marrying your mistress. Jason's expression darkened. His voice dropped low and bitter. You told him, he spat. You ruined everything. No, Jessica said calmly. I saved him. And I saved myself. You ruined everything the day you betrayed us. His jaw tightened, his voice rough. You'll regret this. I won't forgive you for this. Then he turned and walked out, storming through the doors without another word, without even looking back. Jessica watched him go with a heavy, quiet heart, not because she missed him but because she knew deep down he wouldn't let it go. Jason would retaliate. That's who he was. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was done being the trusting, naive woman who took him at his word. That version of her had burned away in that garage, the moment she found Rachel's red purse. A few days later, Jason left their apartment. He packed his things without warning and disappeared, leaving no note, no explanation, not even a text. Jessica didn't try to stop him. There was nothing left to fight for. Their marriage had died the moment the lies surfaced, and she felt it in her bones. The silence that settled afterward was thick and absolute. She sat on the couch, closed her eyes and let herself feel it all. The shock, the grief, the betrayal, the quiet fear. But beneath it, deeper than the pain, something else stirred. A release. A quiet beginning. A sense of motion, of forward breath, of freedom. In the days that followed, she moved slowly, carefully, gathering paperwork for the divorce, meeting with a lawyer, trying to navigate the emotional fallout while holding herself together. It was draining, but she stayed strong, for herself and for Brian. Brian too was struggling. The betrayal had gutted him. But he kept going one step at a time and leaned on Jessica the way she leaned on him. In those first brutal weeks they became even closer, bonded not just by blood, but by what they'd both survived. One evening Brian came by for dinner. He looked tired but somehow more present, more alive than he had in days. There was something new in his eyes, something hopeful. "Thank you, Jess," he said quietly, pulling her into a tight hug. "You saved me. I don't know what I would have done without you." "You'll always have me," she whispered back. "We'll get through this. Together." "I know," he said with a small smile. "Actually, I've been thinking. I want to start something new. Maybe even my own business. It's been in my head for a while. No. I think I'm finally ready." Jessica smiled, her heart warm despite everything. "That's wonderful, Brian. I believe in you. I know you can do it." That night they sat together for hours, talking about what could come next, remembering everything they'd lost, and letting themselves imagine a future that still held possibility. They had been shattered, yes, but not destroyed. And somewhere between their shared grief and quiet dreams, they had found something real. Something steady. Something unshakable. To Jessica's surprise, the divorce process went more smoothly than she had expected, without any drawn-out battles or delays. Since there had never been a prenuptial agreement in place, everything they had acquired together, the apartment, the car, their shared accounts, was split evenly between them, which worked out in her favor. Jason didn't contest anything, didn't fight, didn't even question the terms. It was as if he simply wanted to walk away and erase it all. Jessica didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel like she'd won. What she felt was relief, a quiet, aching release, as if the nightmare had finally started to lift. One evening, as she was sorting through old boxes in the garage and packing to move out, her phone rang unexpectedly. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, and for a moment she considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made her answer anyway. "Hello, Jessica. It's Andrew," said a calm, slightly hesitant voice. The name rang a faint bell, but she couldn't quite place it. "Andrew. I'm sorry I don't," she began, unsure. "I worked with Jason," he said gently. "At the firm. You visited once or twice. I doubt you'd remember me." Now she did. Andrew had been quiet, reserved, someone who rarely spoke, someone who faded into the background easily. She remembered his face more than his voice. "Yes, I remember now," she said, cautious but curious. "Is something wrong?" There was a short pause. "I just thought you deserved to know," he said finally. "I was the one who sent you that anonymous message before Brian's wedding." Jessica froze in place, her breath catching as she tried to process what she'd just heard. "You," she whispered. "You sent it?" "Yes," he said softly. "I did. But why?" The line was quiet for a long moment before Andrew finally answered. Bitterness laced through his tone. "Because Rachel tried the same thing with me before she was involved with Jason. She tried to manipulate me, get something from me, a promotion maybe, or leverage, I don't even know. When I found out what she was doing with Jason and what she had planned with your brother, I couldn't stay quiet. I had to say something. But I didn't think anyone would believe me. So I stayed anonymous." Jessica stood in silence, stunned. She had never imagined that someone else had been tangled in the same lies, another person caught in Rachel's web. "I don't even know what to say," she whispered. "You saved me. You saved Brian." "I just wanted justice," Andrew said plainly. "I watched Jason lie to you. I watched Rachel use your brother. I couldn't keep watching and say nothing." Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, feeling something shift inside her, something deep and heavy giving way to clarity. This man, invisible until now, had been the one to set everything in motion, and because of him, everything had changed. "Thank you," she said. "You did the right thing. You deserved the truth," Andrew said, and with that the call ended. Jessica sat still for a long time, the phone resting quietly in her lap, letting the truth settle through her slowly. She hadn't imagined things. Her instincts had been right. And she hadn't been entirely alone, not really. Somewhere out there, someone had been watching, someone had cared enough to act, someone brave enough to speak when no one else would. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel so isolated in her pain. She began to realize her strength hadn't come only from herself. It had come from connection, from her bond with Brian, and from the anonymous courage of a quiet man who had broken the silence when no one else did. That night, something changed inside her. She no longer wanted to sit in the ruins, haunted by betrayal. She had spent too long trapped in stillness, drowning in sorrow, and she was done letting it define her. It was time to rebuild. She sold her share of the apartment and moved to a quieter part of Lakewood, a neighborhood she'd never lived in, free from old shadows. She left the job she'd held for more than a decade, not because it wasn't stable, but because it no longer meant anything to her. She found something new, something that offered challenge and creativity, something that made her feel awake again. For the first time in years, the world felt like it was opening up instead of closing in. Brian was healing too, slowly but consistently. He found a new job and, to Jessica's surprise, picked up photography again, something he had loved as a teenager but had abandoned along the way. He started traveling, even if just to small towns nearby, calling Jessica from the road to tell her about the golden sunsets he captured or the strangers he met along the way. Their bond deepened through those quiet, frequent calls. They had always been close, but now something unbreakable tied them together, something forged in the fire they'd both survived. One afternoon, as Jessica walked home from the grocery store, she turned a corner and nearly collided with Jason. He looked thinner, older, more worn than she remembered. There were deep lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before, and his eyes were shadowed with something that almost looked like regret. When he saw her, he froze. He lowered his eyes, clearly hoping she might pass without noticing him, but Jessica did notice. And something inside her told her not to look away. "Jason," she said calmly. "Wait." He stopped, turned slowly to face her. His expression held something she hadn't seen in him for a long time. Shame, maybe even sorrow. "Jessica," he began, his voice barely a whisper. I've been wanting to say something." She looked at him steadily, without fear, without anger, just quiet certainty. "I'm sorry," he said. And this time she didn't say anything at all. "For everything." He stood there waiting. Jessica didn't respond immediately. She let the silence settle between them, not to punish but to heal. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "I forgive you." Jason blinked, visibly startled. "You do?" She nodded slightly. "But I'm not doing it for you," she said softly. "I'm doing it for me. I don't want to carry this anymore. I don't want to hate you. I just want to move on." Jason nodded, his lips pressed together as if holding back emotion. "I hope you find happiness, Jessica. Real happiness." "I will," she replied quietly. "And I hope you do too." Then she turned and walked away, not with anger, not with sadness, but with peace that had taken everything to earn. In the days that followed, she returned to a calm rhythm, but it was a new kind of calm. One shaped by resilience, not routine. She had walked through fire and come out not weaker but stronger, more grounded, more sure of herself than ever before. Jessica understood now that betrayal didn't mark the end. It marked a fracture, a painful opening that demanded clarity, demanded truth, demanded that she finally see what she had refused to face. It was, in many ways, the beginning of something else entirely. She no longer second-guessed her instincts. She no longer clung to what no longer served her. She now valued truth even when it hurt. She valued herself, and she was no longer afraid of change. The hard days still came sometimes, memories tugging at her like shadows, but she had learned how to meet them, with strength, with awareness, and with people. Brian. New friends. A new life waiting to unfold. She stood at her window one morning, holding a cup of coffee, letting the early lights spill into her quiet apartment. There were no ghosts whispering behind the glass, no regrets pressing in, just stillness. And in that stillness, Jessica smiled. That spring arrived gently, as if the city itself had taken a long breath. Trees wore pale green again, and the air felt lighter, scented with beginning. Jessica found herself walking more, browsing through used bookstores, listening to music she hadn't played in years. She bought a new notebook and started writing again. Thoughts, impressions, fragments of herself that had been buried but not lost. One Saturday morning, a message came from Brian. "Want to go hiking? Found a trail just outside the city. Looks amazing." She smiled as she typed back. "Count me in." They spent the day exploring wild hills and open skies, pausing to admire flowers, speaking freely, sometimes without words at all. Brian brought his camera, and as he focused on her through the lens, he smiled. "You look lighter, Jess. Like you finally let go." "I have," she answered. "For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm right where I should be." They sat on a sun-warmed rock, the wind soft around them, the sky stretching wide above. After a pause, Brian asked gently, "Do you ever think about her?" He meant Rachel. She nodded. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not with anger. Just as a lesson. A reminder that not everyone is who they seem." She looked toward the horizon. That even the worst betrayal doesn't define who we are. It just reveals who they are. Brian nodded thoughtfully. "I think I needed to hear that." Later that evening, after Brian dropped her off, Jessica stood in her living room, watching the last rays of light slide across the walls. The scars were still there beneath the surface, but they didn't sting anymore. They weren't open. They were healed. And then came a soft knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, she found nothing but a small envelope lying on the welcome mat. No name, no address, just white paper. She picked it up, opened it carefully, and found a single photograph inside. It was old. Faded. Her and Brian, laughing in the backyard at some family barbecue, their arms wrapped around each other, faces sunlit and completely at ease. On the back in clean handwriting were 5 words. Some truths are worth fighting for. Jessica stared at the photo, a lump rising in her throat. She hadn't heard from Andrew since that final call. She didn't know where he was or what had become of him, but this quiet gesture was enough. She placed the photo into a frame and set it on her bookshelf, among things that still mattered. In the weeks that followed, Jessica began saying yes more often. She joined a local book club. She signed up for a weekend painting class. She met people she never would have crossed paths with before. She even agreed to go on a date, just one, but it didn't matter where it led. What mattered was that she was open again. Open to change. Open to herself. Her past hadn't vanished, but it no longer had power over her. And one night, lying in bed with the city humming softly through her window, Jessica whispered to the dark, "I made it." It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. Honest. Whole. She had walked through wreckage. She had faced betrayal. She had chosen to rise. And now she was free.